Well, welcome to a special series of episodes on this podcast. My name is Rachel and I'm here with my husband Luke.
Hello, Rachel.
Hello, Luke.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Good morning on this beautiful sunny day. And we've decided to do a series of episodes on the Beyond Church Raising Leaders podcast called Our Sabbatical Story. Because...
That's a great title.
Thank you. You and I took our first sabbatical ever this year as ministers, church leaders, senior pastors of our church for the past 10 years. And that has been not just an experience for us, but it has involved our family, it's involved our whole church and team, and it's drawn a lot of curiosity from a lot of our peers and friends, ministry friends as well, who maybe have never taken a sabbatical. And I personally have had lots of questions directed at me about how do you do it, what do you do, what's it for? And so we just thought we would take some time to have a chat about that.
I'm looking forward to it.
So am I. And so you'll find these episodes when they come on the Beyond Church Raising Leaders podcast, and they will be episodes called Our Sabbatical Story. So to get us started, let's talk about why we decided to take a sabbatical.
Right, all the way back then.
Yeah, so I think it's helpful for people to understand how we came to that decision. It wasn't an easy decision to make.
No, and do you remember that, so the sabbatical was the middle of 2023 this year. 2022 was the post-COVID year, but with still some restrictions early in the year in our context.
Yeah.
But there was at that time kind of rumblings of burnout, people burning out, the Great Resignation, all those kinds of conversations were being had at the end of 2022.
Because everybody had pushed through 2020 and 2021, and we all thought 2022 was going to be the year where everything kind of came back to normal, like all at once. And when I say back to normal, obviously a new normal, but with some kind of certainty about what life was going to look like. Yeah. But we saw what we were starting to see then was that people had run themselves ragged.
Yeah, so it was in the media, like it was in the news, it was in, every social media feed was suggesting stories about the Great Resignation, burning out. But at the same time, there was also conversations from leaders about resting, like how we should rest, why we should rest, what we should be asking from our team and employees in that time, and senior leadership being encouraged to consider how they would continue to lead through this next season. And so some of the people that we were influenced by, some of the people that we read and listen to, were already talking about the need for senior leaders to take extended rest and sabbatical rest. So some leaders were using that language about sabbatical. So that's kind of what I think began us talking about it. Is it something that we should do? Is it something that we need? Do we even think it's a legitimate concept to be applying in our world today? So we were having those conversations.
That's right, because in our situation and in our story, we had actually decided in 2020, as we cast vision for our church for the year 2020, leading into that year.
Trying to go back that far now.
We had, so at the end of 2019, between you and I, we had decided after we had 7 years of year-on-year growth in our church.
I'm with you now, yep.
And so year-on-year growth is amazing, but it also requires a lot of change. And so we had come to a place of self-awareness of how grueling that change can be, not just for us as the leaders, but for the whole team of people that we're leading. And so we had just kind of quietly decided as the leaders that we would kind of not, we were leaning on the principle of Sabbath and sabbatical a little bit without truly understanding it, I think. And thinking, let's just go a little bit easier in 2020. Let's not set really aggressive growth goals. Let's just maybe let's let it be a year that's a bit more restful. However, then the pandemic.
Then the pandemic.
happened.
So that meant that all of our plans, including plans to have a rested year,
Yeah.
went out the window.
Yes.
And so it was the opposite of a rested year. It was bedlam.
That's
It
right.
was manic. So
That's right.
we were up and down like the rest of the world, week to week, month to month. And I mean, I had a lot of fun. You didn't. You didn't love it as much as I did.
I mean, I essentially had a burnout experience in 2020. In August of 2020, I ended up in hospital one Saturday afternoon with chest pains, and that ended up being 5 days in hospital trying to make sure that there was no serious damage to my heart. And so that was one of those kind of catalyst moments, I guess, for starting to build into our lives some different patterns around work and rest, because to be frank, I just thought that I could keep going forever in my youthful ignorance and stupidity. And that experience showed me that I couldn't, and that it actually had been quite a stressful season to lead a not-for-profit organisation through, when your core business is about gathering people together who don't have to, like, it's not school, you don't have to go.
Yep.
It's not work, you don't have to go.
Yep.
You go to church because you want to.
Yeah.
But then you're also not allowed.
Yeah.
So it was an incredibly stressful situation to lead through that. And so that's part of the story, I guess, of why we decided to take a sabbatical. But then fast forward,
2022,
yeah,
we were getting on with it.
Yeah.
It was still a difficult year to lead through.
Yes.
And
it was disappointing.
And I was of the thinking that we, now moving into 2023, need to double down again. Like, let's really go for it, because there's no reason why things shouldn't be at 110%.
Yeah.
However,
what changed your mind?
Yes. So you were talking about, I mean, I can't remember exactly, but I think you were the one that was suggesting that we consider seriously taking a sabbatical in 2023. I was open to the idea, definitely. And then I can't remember the exact kind of story. Maybe you can remember the story better than me, but
I mean, I think you were close to becoming part of the Great Resignation.
Yeah, that was also part of it too, because I was thinking, well, if this doesn't like turn around in 2023, then I'm all in now or I'm all out. That was kind of my thinking for 2023. However, I kind of felt like there were weeks where I was feeling like I don't think I've got what it takes to do what's required in 2023. Mm-hmm. But then other weeks I was like, yeah, I do. I've got what it takes. And so there was a little bit of that, which again, if you know much about burnout, then that's a common kind of symptom. It's this fluctuating energy level where you feel flat on the floor, but then within a short window of time, you can feel like you can take on the world. So there's something, the circuitry's not right. Yeah. In your mind, and your your tank's empty. It's not holding the emotional energy. It's coming in and it's going out at the same rate.
Yeah.
so then we were thinking, well, we probably should have some kind of a circuit breaker. Then we began to reflect on sabbatical, and I think it might have been you really that was saying you felt like we should do it in 2023.
Yeah, because we had already done a bit of learning by then about sabbaticals, and we'll go into that in a minute. Like where we received the influence from and what the biblical precedent is for it and all of that. So we had been thinking about it, but we also thought that probably the responsible thing and the wise thing would be to spend a couple of years
that's right.
preparing for it. And so we felt like it was maybe not the right thing to do to our church to do it in such a short time frame.
Yeah.
To plan for it for this year.
Yeah, because we had, and some of the learning that we did was about a long runway into the sabbatical for yourself and for your organisation, so that particularly if it's never been done before.
Yes.
So I was kind of okay with that. I was like, yeah, okay, well, we can give it a couple of years, and whilst we're giving it a couple of years, I can just smash it for that year. But
I was in the back of my mind thinking, you're not going to make it to 2 years.
And then it was like you kind of felt like, let's do it, and you said to me, feel like we should do it now, like this year, 2023.
Yeah.
And we could spend the next 6 months planning for it, and we looked at the calendar and it looked like it could have worked on paper, but I was still not keen for it.
Yeah, I'll tell everybody what I was pitching you.
Yes.
Because I was saying, okay.
How to pitch a sabbatical. Go.
I'm trying to get Luke on board with the idea of a sabbatical because I think that we need it. I was trying to pitch, this is a great, like Luke was trying to tell me that he was up for a big adventure again post-COVID.
Are you talking about me in the third person while I'm here? Hang on. Is that the right person or is it the second person?
That's true. Here you are telling me that you're up for a big adventure, but we knew that our church wasn't in a position, like we just practically weren't in a position to take on a big new project or plan for any big growth. We were still trying to recover. And so I'm pitching to you, why don't we see this as the big adventure? Why don't we take our church on a journey of learning what sabbatical is, and like maybe it'll be an epic fail. Maybe we'll go away for a couple of months and we'll come back and the place will have fallen apart or it will have split or people will have burnt out, like we will have put burnout on other people because we've asked them to do too much, or maybe this is the big risk that we could take. And then the practical reasons why I thought that it was good timing, or it could be good timing, were practically we were coming up to the end of a 10-year season as the senior pastors of our church, and we were planning a celebration. So it was going to be really obvious to people in our world that we've completed a 10-year period of work. And so even just in the natural world, it makes sense to take a longer rest. That's what long service leave is.
Yep.
in your normal job.
Yep.
So we thought, well, people will understand that. That will make sense that we're taking a longer break after 10 years of service. I was pitching to you, we are still rebuilding. So there's not a lot of activity. There's not new things that we've started that then we have to find leaders to carry while we're away. So there's another reason. And I was also pitching to you that we should do it. It's our first time in winter, because winter in our context in church life is a quieter season. We're in a cold place. People don't come out for all of your midweek activities and groups and whatever anyway. So we were already planning to have a bit of a quiet winter in terms of just church activity day to day, week to week. And you and I personally had already planned a family holiday as part of the winter break. We were already doing a big family thing with my whole family. So we were like, well, it wouldn't be that much extra time to kind of build that out by a bit longer. So that was the pitch.
Yeah, and I was still reluctant to jump on board with that. It wasn't the pitch that won me over. I mean, it was a good pitch. But I remember going for a walk from the church office and spending probably 10 minutes out. I might have gone to get lunch or something. I can't remember. I don't know if you can remember that. But I came back into the office, where we worked together, and I said that,
because we had a bit of an emotionally charged conversation about it.
Yeah, that's right. And I came back and I felt as though while I was out on that walk that God stirred me up and got me excited, like you were in the pitch. I felt like I had, that could be our adventure. That could be our big risk. That could be our let's just see how it goes. And the other thing was, I felt as though God just wanted me to have an experience of trust, like a deepening of trust. And so when I kind of felt as though God was saying, well, do you trust me? And I felt like it's really clearly an opportunity for me to really exercise that and go, yeah, God, oh, well, yeah, wow, I could trust you with all of this. Like, it's yours anyway, so let's go for it. Let's just trust you with it, and let's have an adventure, and let's allow the church to experience what it is to have that time. Because that's the other thing too, that it was like I was robbing the church of an opportunity to experience that level of growth that can only really be achieved when the senior leadership steps away for an extended period of time.
Yeah.
So all of it started to come together for me on that walk. And yes, your pitch, what God was saying, how I was seeing it. And then when I came back, I was keen to kind of get into the planning, like how we do it, how we tell the church, how we tell our teams, how's the family dynamic going to work, and all that sort of stuff. I was then excited to, start to put it into motion. Yeah.
So let's then move on to where we received influence about sabbaticals in the first place. So why would ministers take a sabbatical? What's the biblical precedent? And then, let's start with the Bible, because we do take our influence from the Bible first, but then we also had some influence that we received from people in the contemporary context about what it might look like in 21st century life.
Yeah.
So do you want to?
Oh yeah. Well, the Sabbath principle.
Since you're the theology guy.
Oh, it's not deep theology. It's like all those other Old Testament principles. So today we don't superimpose the Old Testament law into our modern day context because we don't farm anymore. We don't have oxen. We don't have yokes. We don't have fields that we till. Well, we don't. So
certainly not.
So there's many of those kind of rules or expectations that can't be superimposed upon today's context because they just don't fit. But what is able to be taken is the principle of almost all of the Old Testament. Principally, can be applied today if we understand the biblical principle. And so Sabbath is one of those. It's a rest. And when God created the world, the universe, he rested on the seventh day, the Sabbath day. But in addition to having a day of rest, the Bible talks about having a year of rest. And so in Exodus chapter 23, the Bible says in verse 10, plant and harvest your crops for 6 years, but let the land be renewed, and that's the key word, the renewal, renewed, and lie uncultivated or unworked during the seventh year. And it's simple, it's not deep, but the principle applies. But what I find interesting about that is that the farmers or the agricultural context is that you've got to plant 6 years worth, like you plant and harvest for 6 years. When you have a Sabbath rest, you let the ground rest for the seventh year. But that also means that you need to trust that not only will there be enough in the sixth to last the seventh, but there'll be enough in the sixth to last the eighth.
That's right, while you plant again.
That's right. So it has to be a huge level of trust to be able to take that whole year to be renewed and to be rested. And it also talks about allowing your servants to have rest and your servants to be renewed, and let your animals have rest and let your animals find renewed. So in our context, that's the whole machine. It needs to have an opportunity just to rest. And the whole machine needs to also have an opportunity to trust God for a miracle provision that there's no room for. Our church talks about this, making room for a miracle, and really the Sabbath day and the Sabbath year is like the perfect example. It forces you to make room for a miracle, and then when God turns up, as he always does, he gets all the glory. There's enough. There's more than enough. There's a miracle that's been outworked. We get to celebrate it. We get to, honour God for it. So that's the biblical precedent. Yeah.
Well, but then also, I think another thing I've just remembered as like a reason, maybe not a reason for the Sabbath, but for the sabbatical. But once we had made the decision to do it. And then we started...
This was in early 2023. It was before we started the year, because we were in the office alone.
That's right. It was when everyone was on holidays and we'd already cast the vision for the year, and that hasn't changed. And if anything, our church's vision was about being all heart for God in every area of your life. And like you're saying, this was going to require us to trust God in ways that we'd never had to trust him before, because whenever we're running around busy doing all the work, it doesn't leave room for God to prove his provision in those ways. But anyway, once we had decided to take the sabbatical, I was just reading in my personal devotions in the Old Testament about the year of Jubilee. So the 7 times 7 principle of rest. And the biblical model there is that on the year of Jubilee, the 50th year, kind of after the 7 times 7 year periods, it's this promise from God of a year of freedom, like a year of celebration and feasting and
cancelling of debts.
That's it, cancelling of debts. Thank you, Jesus. And I just had this revelation. It was confirmation, I guess, that this was the right year. Because as I'm reading about the year of Jubilee and I'm all inspired, so I start thinking about 50. And I realise that for you and I personally, 2030 will be the year that you and I each turn 50, which is the end of the next 7-year period for us. And then I realised that our youngest, we've got 4 kids, our youngest child would turn 18 in 2030 as well. So it kind of signifies a freedom in a sense of it's the end of a season of parenting children, because then our children will all be adults. We'll still be parenting them, but it will be different. And so I just felt like that was one of those angels singing in the sky moments where I was like, well, of course this is the perfect year. And it also gave purpose to the sabbatical, because all of a sudden now I'm thinking, okay, I know what we can be thinking about, praying about, seeking to hear from God about during the sabbatical, because he's shown me that there's the next 6-year period of productivity, and then 2030 will be the next sabbatical rest.
Yeah, there's lots to learn in that principle about planning and preparing for those windows of productivity. And I hadn't really thought that deeply about it, but I think that it's a really neat way to cast vision. We cast annual vision for our organisation, for our own family. We budget across a 12-month period. But then there's also this, now that we've had a sabbatical, a new idea of, well, let's be planning for 7-year blocks of time as well. And for us, for our church, for our family, we can budget that 7-year window. What will our business look like? What will our church look like? What will our income look like? What should our big expenses be across that 7-year window? And then be able to layer those 7 years on top of each other across across a lifetime. So that's been really interesting, like to have that whole new paradigm kind of come alive through the sabbatical. And I was also just going to say on that biblical principle before you move on to the next thing, that it's to just dismiss that idea, that principle, I think is quite an affront to God. I think that it's fair to say that to just say, oh look, we don't really need to have that rest on the 7th day of the week. We don't really need to have an extended break after 7 years of productivity, is really saying that God needs you, and without you, he can't get things done. And that's a funny way to say it, but seriously, I think it's quite. I just think it's quite rude, and
it's a bit arrogant.
Arrogant's the word I'm looking for, and I think it says a lot about your narcissistic tendencies if you think that you have got it you've got it better put together than God has, and God's principles and plans. You don't really need to apply them to your life because you've got it all worked out. So I would just say that as a challenge as well. For some people who might think that it's. And I was one of those people.
Yeah,
which is why
you can say it because you were.
That's right, which is why I can be so strong with my language about it, because I was absolutely one of those people that thought this is for people who, are lazy or they're
weak,
or they've burnt out and they're weak. They don't have what it takes. I just think that's arrogance, absolute arrogance, that you think that you know better than God when it comes to the way that things should be productive and patterns and principles of the Bible. Yeah, so I'd just challenge that thought if it was there in your mind.
Effectively done, effectively challenged. So that's what the Bible says. But then, what I found interesting was, we referred to some listening and reading that we had done about sabbaticals before we made the decision.
Yep.
And those were primarily from Pete Scazerro. So he's kind of I haven't done deep study or research into it, but he's the guy who's come across my path most consistently as the guru, if you like, on sabbaticals, and he really teaches on it really well. And so you can look at all of his content.
We also discovered recently, post-sabbatical, that Eugene Peterson has written on sabbatical as well.
Haven't read.
Yeah.
But then when we went to look around and ask other people questions about sabbaticals and how they did it and how long they took and how it worked, I guess I realised that there weren't that many people in our world that had ever taken one.
Surprising, wasn't it?
Yeah. So,
well, yes and no, because, some people do have extended leave.
Yeah.
They might take long service leave, or they might have an extended holiday. But we hadn't really come across anyone who'd had a sabbatical, which is a very different concept and experience.
Maybe a ministry sabbatical, because, I know academics take sabbaticals, for the purpose of writing a book or, things like that. But in terms of specifically ministry leaders, it kind of made us aware that there weren't that many people who had taken a sabbatical the way that we were thinking about it,
Yep.
at least, which is why we thought this would be helpful to share. So how then did we start to plan for the sabbatical with, that biblical influence, with the influence from podcasts that we'd listened to and books that we'd read, from people who had shared some of their sabbatical experiences? Let's just get down to some of the nitty gritty. Like, where do you start if you were gonna take a sabbatical?
Good question.
I'm asking you, the planner.
Yeah, I'm the planner for sure. No, well, yeah, and it's the way I think about it. I'm a visual learner.
Yeah.
External processor, visual learner. I saw the preparation and the communication kind of in concentric circles. So, we planned together first, you and I, and got it in our heart and a conviction within us about, what it was and what it should look like. And so we planned, we drafted a plan because we had to take it to our board.
That's right.
And that's where the next sort of layer goes out. So, we talked about it. We'd gone to our board. We didn't talk with our kids about it at that stage because we hadn't had it approved yet. So if it didn't get approved and it wasn't going to be a thing to do, then we wouldn't have, needed to talk about it with our kids. So it was, us. We talked to our board about it. Once they'd approved it, then we went a little wider and talked to our kids about it. And then from there, again, we met together again about how we would communicate that with the wider group, which was our key team. Mm-hmm. So there's a handful of people around us that are our key team. Communicate it with them, which was an experience in itself. We could talk about that at some point too. And then we talked about how we'd communicate it with our church, but that itself was something that we mapped out across the time between, when we first started work in early February to when we took the sabbatical. And that whole planning thing, you could, I don't know how we're going to do this in the future. I'm thinking out loud, but that's something that we could probably even write down and have available for people to see what that looked like.
I think you've missed a crucial step, which I just remembered as you were getting down to the wider circles, which is that there were a couple of key people who we spoke to before we went to the board.
Yes.
Who we knew we were going to have to lean on and ask to take on a high level of responsibility if we took the time off.
Yes.
And so we needed to have their yes in. We felt it was a responsible thing to have their yes in place and their availability over the specific time period before we then took our planning any further. And
that's why it is so important to get in early, because you have to lean on some people, and so that means you're going to have to give them plenty of lead-in time too. So that's when initially we're like, let's give ourselves a couple of years. But when we felt like it was a God thing to do it this year, it was like, okay, well, let's see these people. And again, their response helped to confirm that it was a God thing. Yeah. And practically, in our context, we're a small church. We don't have a lot of paid staff. This was literally asking volunteer team members to be available to step up and take on a high level of responsibility to help cover our absence. So it was a big ask, and we're, eternally grateful to so many of our team members. But I'm just trying to highlight practically that it is possible for people who are leading in small contexts to take a sabbatical. It's the same anyway. It's the same. But the context to me, I don't think it matters. I mean, it matters, but whether you lead a big machine or not, or something small. So if it's big responsibility, and so there's a huge amount of weight that you're having to transfer to others. Obviously, smaller, it means you don't have the paid staff, you don't have the transfer's different, but it's not less significant. It's still a big ask whether you've got a lot going on or not. It doesn't matter because it all works out in the wash. It's a big ask. To take a sabbatical. So I might just practically run through some of the detail of how we decided to structure the time, and we can just talk about some of that and why. So we decided to take July and August as our 2 months. We had, again, Pete Scazerro kind of gave us the guide about sometime between 8 weeks and 14 weeks is a good time frame. And because sounds like a long time, doesn't it? 14 weeks. Sorry for interrupting you. Yeah. Because we chose 8 weeks. Yeah. The shorter option. Yeah. Well, and because we've never done it before, so we didn't know, we honestly were
taking it as an experiment. So
Yep.
we thought, well, this kind of works. And as I mentioned before, we already had this family holiday booked in. It was a big family get-together in another place that had taken months of planning for my dad's 70th. It was a big deal. So we thought, well, let's let that be the start, and then we'll run. And it just happened that we were already booked in to go there on the 1st of July. So we thought, okay. The 1st of July also practically marked the end of term 2, school term. So it meant that we got to have 2 full terms of normal church activity, working towards the vision we'd already cast for the year with our church, and also communicating and planning for what things were going to look like. So it gave us a 6-month almost
Runway.
lead in to tell people this is happening, then what this is, why it's happening, and what it's going to look like.
But would you advise longer than 6 months to plan for that and to get team on board, or do you think that's long enough in hindsight?
In hindsight, I think it was enough for us, but we were very intentional about it. We didn't just let it kind of creep up. I guess for me, I knew then, right from once it was all confirmed in like February, I knew that I was spending time each week planning for it. So that meant that I was asking people to take on responsibility for specific things. It meant that I was doing the mental work of figuring out what things would need to look like and who we would need to ask for help, and making sure that people had enough time. If, it meant us asking a lot of people to take on a higher level of responsibility in whatever area they were serving in than they had before. So, that's training time. It's time to help them feel comfortable. It's time for them to, watch me do a role, or you do a role, or, So
6 months.
6 months lead in, 2 months away, and then how to structure that time.
The sabbatical break.
Yeah.
And that's something that we, again, took a lead from
Pete Scazerro.
Yeah, Pete Scazerro. However, he wasn't prescriptive. He just gave some broad brushstrokes as to what you want to achieve through the sabbatical and what kinds of things would help you achieve that.
Yeah.
So you're looking to find some time to rest, to have some to do some things that help to renew, your emotional tank, your physical energy, and your spiritual renewal. So that what kinds of things would do that for you, and then how would that look across that particular length of time? So like you said, we had something booked in already in the first week.
And the reason that worked too was because the advice was start with a holiday.
Yeah, and there's also advice about making sure that you celebrate, because if it's a 7-year time frame from when you had your last sabbatical break, or you've never taken one before, you should have a lot to celebrate. And the sabbatical is a big part of sabbatical is celebration. And there's actually some literature on feasting in a sabbatical break, and spending some of your time enjoying the harvest of the previous season.
Yeah.
And so that means, that means just taking the time to cheer each other on. If you've got a family, cheering your family on, and just enjoying it. So the breaking it up across the 8 weeks. Are we taking a deep dive into that now?
Well, what we're going to do is we're going to just tell everybody what the plan was.
Right.
And then in the future episodes, we're going to go through each chunk of time bit by bit to kind of share what happened.
Okay.
So the vision here was we've decided to take 2 months.
Yep.
We've decided to take them in winter.
Yep.
We've heard that it's a good idea to start with a holiday because it helps you reset, wind down, de-stress. And lo and behold, we've already planned a holiday at the start anyway.
So we had holidays tick.
2 weeks of
family
holidays.
holiday with your whole family.
Yep.
Then our own personal holiday, just to us,
That's
our
right.
nuclear family, for a week.
Yep.
And then we...
So that was the first 2 weeks was going to be holiday. So then the next week we had some flexibility about what we would do because our kids were still going to be on school holidays. And so we kind of hadn't locked that in. We just were dreaming about what we might do in that period of time.
Yeah. And it's also a time recommended that you do something that is a new experience.
Yes.
Explore a new place, learn a new skill. So we wanted to try and fit that into the 8 weeks as well.
Yeah, so we're thinking about what are some things that we could do. And also we hadn't budgeted a huge amount of money because we made the decision kind of after we created our family budget. we had the money that we would normally spend on holidays, and we had the money that we would normally spend on what we call in our budget marriage enrichment, which is where we have a sum of money each year to do fun things. Sometimes it's take an overseas holiday at our wedding anniversary to put towards it. So we were looking to do things that would fit within those budget constraints and not put financial stress on ourselves, but also to make the most of the opportunity of the time that we'd been given. Then in the middle, we had planned some time once our kids were going to be back at school to practice the spiritual disciplines of solitude and silence. And the vision here was to expand on a practice that we've implemented the past couple of years, whereby each of us would take some time, a small amount of time, a day or two, on our own, away from family responsibility and away from work responsibility, just to be with God and hear from God. So we thought, well, here's a good opportunity to expand on that. And practically, it meant that one of us would stay home and do the kids stuff, kids going back to school, kids going to school camp, all of that, while the other took a few days away. And then the next week we switched it around. So we planned that for the middle, and that was where we were really, I guess, our vision was to spend some time really seeking God about what that next period of productivity was going to look like. And then because the pitch that we originally gave our board was about using the rest of the leave that we would normally have for the year, plus some of our long service leave, to make up the time, to pay for the time effectively, we decided that we would do a trip towards the end that would replace our normal wedding anniversary trip at the end of the year. And so chunk it together like that.
And then there's still a couple of weeks beyond that, which we use to just start to get back into the rhythm of life, having, our children still, they're back at school, they've been at school for ages by then, but, we're back into the rhythm of life, but giving us some time, and the advice is to not just jump back in cold turkey. So, we had a board meeting
already scheduled,
which we attended 2 weeks before we finished the sabbatical, and then we started to, get across work responsibilities, so that when we hit the ground running back at work, back in our Sunday services, that we were already kind of warmed up to work.
Yeah. So that was the vision. That was the plan, and we're going to leave it there for today.
Yep.
And then in the next few episodes, we will start taking a bit of a week by week or section by section dive into where we went, what we experienced, what we heard from God, and share some more stories and insights as we reflect on our sabbatical story. So we'll see you next time.
Bye.